Beijing, China, September 4th, 2025. A fresh diplomatic storm is brewing after European Union top diplomat Kaja Kallas openly criticised Beijing's massive military parade, which was attended by Chinese President Xi Jinping, Russian President Vladimir Putin, and North Korean leader Kim Jong Un. The event, staged in Beijing's historic heart, was meant as a show of unity and power, but Kallas branded it as evidence of an emerging anti-Western bloc, suggesting it was a direct challenge to global order. China wasted no time firing back. In Beijing, Foreign Ministry spokesman Guo Jiakun faced the press, delivering a sharp rebuttal that sought to dismantle Kallas's claims and reframe the narrative. The spokesman's words were heavy with condemnation, casting the European stance as narrow-minded and disconnected from history. Standing before journalists, Guo criticised the European remarks with visible firmness. Guo Jiakun said, "The remarks made by a certain EU official are full of ideological bias, lack basic historical knowledge, and blatantly stir up confrontation and conflict. They show disrespect for the history of World War II and undermine the interests of Europe itself. Such statements are profoundly misguided and utterly irresponsible. China firmly opposes and strongly condemns them." The spokesman's tone underscored China's growing frustration with European leaders, who have increasingly aligned themselves with Washington's framing of Beijing as a systemic rival. Guo emphasized that comments such as Kallas's not only misrepresent China's intentions, but also erode the very foundation of trust that Europe claims to defend. Journalists pressed further on whether Beijing saw Kallas's comments as part of a broader European Union strategy or simply the opinion of a single leader. Guo avoided naming Kallas directly, but made clear that China regarded the statement as representative of a wider pattern of what it perceives as arrogance from European officials. When asked how China expected Europe to respond after such a rebuke, Guo doubled down. Guo Jiakun said, "We hope that those people will abandon their frog-in-the-well prejudice and arrogance, develop a correct understanding of the history of World War II and a rational perception of China, immediately correct their wrong remarks, undo negative impact, and do more things that are conducive to world peace and stability and China-Europe relations, and not the opposite." The metaphor of the frog in the well, drawn from Chinese idiom, paints the picture of those with limited perspective, incapable of seeing the wider world. For Beijing, it was a pointed way of telling Europe that its worldview is confined by Western preconceptions rather than historical reality. The remarks come at a delicate time. Relations between China and the European Union have been strained by disagreements over trade, security, and human rights. Kallas's comments added fuel to a fire already lit by disputes on issues ranging from Beijing's ties with Moscow to its stance on the war in Ukraine. European leaders, particularly those from Eastern and Baltic states, have long expressed suspicion over China's growing closeness with Russia. For them, the image of Xi, Putin and Kim appearing together in military uniforms was more than symbolism. It was a warning shot about the world's shifting balance of power. Kallas captured that fear when she called it an attempt to forge an anti-Western New World Order. In Beijing, however, the Foreign Ministry sees such interpretations as deeply flawed. Officials argue that military parades in China are rooted in history and tradition, commemorating victories and sacrifices of past generations. To suggest otherwise, they say, is to deny the significance of World War II, in which China played a central role against fascism. By highlighting World War II, Guo linked China's modern image with its historical legacy. In his view, Europe's comments not only dishonor that memory, but also risk alienating China at a time when global cooperation is desperately needed. The emphasis on world peace and stability was no accident. It was a reminder that Beijing still positions itself as a champion of international order, albeit on its own terms. Observers noted the strong language used in Guo's response. Terms such as utterly irresponsible and frog-in-the-well prejudice are not mere diplomatic flourishes. They reflect Beijing's rising confidence in confronting Western criticism head-on. In years past, China might have chosen more restrained wording, but today its diplomats appear ready to strike back in defense of its political narrative. The presence of Kim Jong Un at the parade added another layer of sensitivity. For the European Union, his participation reinforced suspicions of an emerging coalition of authoritarian states. For China, however, it was framed as part of maintaining regional ties and ensuring stability on the Korean peninsula. The difference in perspective highlights the deep mistrust that now defines the relationship between Beijing and Brussels. Analysts in Beijing suggested that Kallas's criticism may have been intended to play to domestic audiences in Europe as much as to China. With European politics increasingly shaped by fears of Russian aggression and anxiety over China's global ambitions, sharp statements against Beijing resonate strongly at home. Still, by publicly confronting China, Kallas drew a reaction that may complicate future EU-China dialogue. Guo's words were also aimed at signalling strength to domestic audiences. By condemning European rhetoric as profoundly misguided, he reinforced the message that Beijing will not tolerate being lectured or undermined by foreign leaders. This reflects a broader trend in Chinese diplomacy under Xi Jinping, one that seeks to project firmness, dignity, and independence in the face of criticism. For now, the exchange is likely to deepen the rhetorical chasm between Europe and China. While Brussels continues to warn about Beijing's ties with Moscow and Pyongyang, Beijing insists that such warnings are rooted in outdated thinking. Both sides claim to defend peace and stability, yet their visions of what that looks like remain profoundly different. As the cameras left the Foreign Ministry briefing room, the message from Beijing was unmistakable. China is prepared to defend its image and challenge those who attempt to define it on Western terms. Whether Europe chooses to temper its tone or escalate further remains to be seen. What is certain is that diplomacy between the two sides has grown increasingly combative, with words carrying as much weight as actions.